I mean, that's my favorite question to ask writers. What's in the vault? What's unencumbered that's been hanging around that had 7 shots but didn't make it? Those are often the best scripts.
And it's just like the idea is there, and it just needs to be, like, updated for, you wrote it 10 years ago, it just needs a little, like, dusting off and updating, like,
Or
maybe
gender
it's more
flipped or
relevant now.
what or this or
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Great. Ideas are great.
Good morning. Welcome back to 5 a.m. Story Talk, a place to talk about stories in all their forms, the craft that goes into them, and the role that art plays in our lives. I'm Cole Haddon, and today I'm going to be joined by two of my favorite U.S. producers. Erica Lee, who's a partner at Thunder Road Films. This is the company behind the John Wick universe, which Erica produces across the board. And Blye Pagon Faust, who, amongst so many brilliant TV projects I'll talk more about in a moment, won the Academy Award for Best Picture for producing a little film called Spotlight. Typically, I'd start by discussing with you what I've been up to or maybe what's going on in the world, but I'm a little short on time this week. I've just started a new TV pilot for a series I've been commissioned to write and create. I wish I could tell you more about it, but it hasn't been officially announced yet. I can say I am having a lot of fun working on it, especially after a few months dedicated almost entirely to a big interstate move, settling my family into our new community, and launching this podcast. So, jumping right back into things, as in who my guests are this week, I met the two of them in 2009 and 2010 after I'd been in Hollywood for a few years. Blye on a general when she was still partners with Nicole Rockland, who also produced Spotlight, and Erica 1 year later when she was starting out as a development exec for Thunder Road. I just looked at some old emails and saw she and her boss, Basil Iwanek, pitched me an adaptation of Dan Dare, a classic British sci-fi comic book. Now that would have fit right in with what I was generally known for in Hollywood at the time, making old IP feel fresh and relevant and exciting again. Well, at least in theory. I talked about some of this in last week's episode, by the way, about how I broke into the business. Both Erica and Blye were at the start of their producing careers in a lot of ways when we met, and we've stayed in touch over the years. In fact, I had lunch with Blye recently. She spent a year living in Australia, so I took her to one of my favorite spots in Sydney, King's Cross. When I decided to launch this podcast, they were two of the first producers I thought of inviting to join me for a conversation. I think I was intrigued by the fact that Blye and Erica produce such different things, but have both grown into monsters in their fields. I wondered what interesting insights their disparate experiences and instincts might produce as we talked. The fact that the two of them hadn't yet met was just icing on the cake. I absolutely wanted them to know each other. Listen, I want to tell you everything both of these brilliant people have accomplished in their careers, but that's just not going to be possible. You're going to have to settle for the Cliff's Notes version. Let's start with Erica. Her first producing credit was on John Wick back in 2014, albeit as an EP. She brought the project into Thunder Road. The film was obviously a huge hit, one of those insane zeitgeist moments in our culture you don't see coming. I sat down with her a week after it was released and still hadn't quite settled in what was happening. But it kept growing and growing and growing, and as a result, has become one of the few original Hollywood action franchises of the 21st century. By its sequel, Erica was in the big seat, producing with her boss Basil, which is how she eventually became a partner at Thunder Road. She's been across the John Wick universe ever since, from sequels to TV to spin-offs like Ballerina, which is coming later this year. She's also produced or EP'd Sicario and its sequel, Wind River, The Informer, Kandahar, Silent Night, and this past year, Monkey Man, which was Dev Patel's just outstanding, incredibly fun directorial debut. As for Blye, winning the Best Picture Oscar for Spotlight, does it get much cooler than that? My wife and I screamed when she and her partner Nicole won in 2016. Spotlight literally changed lives. It changed how people thought and talked about the sexual abuse that was rampant in the Catholic Church and the systemic covering up of it by the church's leadership. It was based on a series of news articles that earned the Globe the 2003 Pulitzer Prize for Public Service. This has become something of a specialty of Blye's, finding true stories and helping shepherd their adaptation from page to screen and podcast. Today, she's the co-founder of Storyforce Entertainment with Corey Shepard Stern, and she's produced the documentary films Belly of the Beast, for which she won an Emmy, Rewind, The Grab, and Zorowski vs. Texas. Her TV work has been getting a lot of attention too. She's behind the docuseries LulaRich and Shiny Happy People, Duggar Family Secrets. Obviously, she's still trying to change the world, and thank the gods for it. Blye, Eric, and I are going to discuss a lot in this first part of our conversation, from the challenge of getting movies up these days, to working with and developing ideas with screenwriters, to the notion of the undeniable idea or script. You want to stick around for the bonus episode too. This one's a bit different than what you've come to expect here, as it was recorded early on in this podcast adventure for me, and I hadn't quite nailed what the series' identity was going to be. Long story short, Blye and Erica won't be helping me break down seminal pieces of art from their lives. Instead, we'll be digging deeper into how they know when a project is right for them, what it takes to get projects made in 2025, how they feel about writers using AI, if they're as scared about Hollywood's future as I am, and much, much more. Be sure to hit subscribe if you haven't already. Likes and comments are always helpful and appreciated, and you can find links to much of what we discuss as well as to the 5 a.m. Story Talk newsletter in the show notes too. And now, without any further delay, let me introduce you to my friends, producers Blye Pagon Faust and Erica Lee.
Thank you for joining me today. I'm big fans of both of you, as you know, and I'm looking forward to having a conversation about what you guys do as producers. And so Doc Brown pulls up in a DeLorean and tells you to hop in. He'll take you to any point in Hollywood's history for you to keep making film or TV or whatever else you want to do. Where do you go? Erica, you want to start first?
As a fun question, I think I always feel like I sort of like just missed the heyday of the film business. So I think for what I do, which is like a lot of mid-budget, mid-range thriller action movies, I feel like the late 90s, early 2000s would have been really fun to kind of been at my peak, just because I feel like we could have gotten so many movies made and, not to be like crass, but made so much more money. Like it was just so much more robust than it is now. I think just honestly, like in a spot where it would be easier and I don't know, have more product and just more fun. Basil, my partner, was an executive in the 90s, in the late 90s at Warner Brothers, and just the sort of like the crazy stories, and it just I think was more fun. And I'm jealous of those times. I mean, it's still a fun job, comparatively to like my brother who's an accountant, but like it can be a grind, and I feel like I just sort of missed the heyday.
Always wonder though, don't you, like sometimes like where people always it always sounds so good in like retrospect, but like living it, was it really that much more fun? I don't know. Maybe it was. I don't know. It's sort of like because you get to pick and choose, right? All of those like the best of everything. But I was wondering.
Yeah, maybe it would have been harder in some respects. I think, as a woman who works primarily in that genre too, it is sort of hard-ish, but I definitely like so many walls have already been broken down for me by others. I don't know. I guess it's fun to dream about it though.
What about you, Blye? Where in history would you go?
I think there's something to be said for the idea of being a woman in the producer's chair. And like, you think back into the heydays of the 70s and the movies that were made then, but you think about the women who had to, lead the charge and what they had to go through. So I think a more current, place in history is more palatable for someone, especially like me, who doesn't live in LA as well, and who has sort of been a nomad, knocking around and been outside the system. I think that looking at, really kind of thinking about what was the ideal time, frankly, it was probably right after Spotlight. It was like right at that, 2016, 2017, because we do, film, we do scripted, we do docs, we do podcasts, we do it all. And it sort of was like the world was your oyster. There were so many options and opportunities at the time. There was so much like money coming in. The streamers were still there. All the studios were there. Participant, who we, had so many projects with, were alive and well, and people were paying silly money for doc features or series or whatever it may have been. And so it was like just that flexibility and to do it from afar, and having already had all those trailblazers ahead of us in terms of producers as women, it definitely felt like it was a good time, and we sold and set up a lot of things, which feels very different in 2025, but we'll get to that, I'm sure. Yeah.
Oh, we will. I'm curious, like, what was the last contemporary film you saw of any kind, including docs that you wish you'd made yourself?
September 5th. I saw. I love this year. I thought it was incredibly well done. I was like, oh, that feels like a story force project very much. I mean, there is obviously the journalism component, but and I love Conclave. Like that feels like we would have loved to have made that.
Mhm. Erica?
That is a good question. And I've watched so many movies lately. I loved Conclave too. I don't know if I would have made it or could have made it, but that's a really good question. I know it's funny, we were talking about F1 yesterday and just like the madness. It hasn't come out yet, but like the idea of like a giant Brad Pitt Formula One racing movie where it's just like over the top, really cool action, I think. And like what they're spending on it. I think it'd be fun just to make like a giant streamer movie in the moment, just to see what it's like, because I haven't done that yet.
When you say you're not sure if that's a movie you could have made, is that it's just what do you mean by that?
Yeah, I guess you could have. I don't really we dabble in like the prestige drama circle. I think a little bit with Hotel Mumbai, a little bit with A Private War, but those movies still had like action or sort of thriller elements to them with some scope and some scale. They weren't just I've never really done like a straight drama. Not to say that we couldn't. I just sort of I feel like this town is still a bit like a frat, right? Like you sort of like stay in your lane a little bit. You get what you get submitted stuff and you like are in rooms with certain people. And I don't know, we did this movie, The Current War, which was like Weinstein's last movie. And it was a drama and it was just sort of it's interesting. I just don't know if it would have like sort of come across my desk in that way.
And you guys are fiscally responsible. You guys are, you actually, yeah, you run a balance sheet. You run a studio like that or a company that is commercially responsible. Like those movies are so hard to do. Obviously, when they're done well, and you hit a bullseye, you can do well, but it's feast or famine in that space.
I think so. I think, but you watch like I watched like Amelia Perez, and you're like, I appreciate the sort of going for it. And a lot of I think the independent movies this year, The Brutalist is a good example. I was tracking that movie because my friend edited it, and like when I was in Budapest a year ago, he was like, "You won't believe this movie I'm editing. It's 3.5 hours, and he's not listening to anybody." It's like all these things, right? And I'm sure I would have given notes to cut 3.5. You're like, but I appreciate the sort of the ballsiness of it. But I wouldn't have made it. I wouldn't have made a 3.5 hour movie if I had my druthers. I don't think so.
I was curious if you could remember what is the best script you've ever read, produced or unproduced? The one that you just constantly think back to, measure things against. And I'm very happy to hear about the unproduced one that broke your heart, whatever that is. Blye?
I read Liz Hannah's original spec for The Post, and I just remember being blown away. And it was, it was different, and not entirely different than what ultimately was made, but there was something really beautifully personal about the character and just the way she had written it. And it blew me away. And I was like, this woman's a star, and I love this movie, and I wish I could make it.
Erica?
That's a very good question. I can't remember what I did yesterday, but it's funny. You sit there and you're like, and we'll hang up and I'll think of like 10.
Yeah.
There's like a David Scarpa script. There's so many scripts along the way that I love that were so unproducible. It's funny you brought up Jamie Linden earlier. I remember reading We Are Marshall, the first draft of that, and I was a baby at the time, but just like loving it so deeply and crying and it being so beautiful that I still feel like that'll be one of the most important movies that I will ever have sort of a small part in. But there's so many good scripts. But that's the thing is like that's what I love about being in the film business. Like Basil and I will he'll walk in and I've worked with him, it'll be 20 years next month or in May. He would have got one script from like X. Does Warner still own that? Like whatever that is, right? And there's always maybe a shot. I don't know. I think that is what's so fun about this business. I think for me, it's more about the scripts that are like not perfect. Sicario, the first time I read it was good. It wasn't the most amazing script I had ever read, but there was something special about it. And, Taylor had tried shopping it and a couple places were like, oh, we don't want cartel movies. So I think for me, it's more about like just finding something that you're passionate about and kind of like pushing it through that and how a bill becomes a law, like getting it to that next step.
Following up on Jamie, yesterday he brought up the idea that there's such a thing as an undeniable script, and yet so many scripts we love don't get made. Do you think that there is such a thing as the undeniable script, the undeniable idea? Either one of you.
I feel like if a script is undeniable, it like usually at some point has some life to it, and it may go through many incarnations. And I think like a script that, we launched it at AFM, I've been working on for 7 years, and it's had 3 different directorial incarnations, 4 different leads by the time we shoot it. And so I think the timing of things is sometimes meant to be, but I think if the story is right and the roles are like all of it sort of fits together and it still feels timely, then it'll get made. I don't know if there's an undeniable reason. I think that's cyclical. I think there's like I'm sure someone writing some fire script right now that feels undeniable to make like that feels reactive to so many elements. But usually if there's things that are like really amazing roles, some actor right at some point will want to do it who has enough juice to get it done.
Totally agree. Yeah. I mean, to think about like all those scripts too over the years that made the blacklist and like the incredible ones. And the ones I think that were just so amazing, or even not even on the blacklist, but anything else you've ever read, they do find a way. It just takes time, like you said, Eric. I mean, it's like, and it just has all the pieces have to come together. The time has to be right, but they usually find a way.
Well, the hard part about the blacklist is like the blacklist is a lot of like good writing, but not movies, or not commercial movies, or not, full like fully thought out pieces. I think I feel like a lot of them are like these biopics that work like in the moment, right?
Yep.
Um,
Yep. And the blacklist looked like years ago when it first started. Those movies, a lot more of them used to obviously get made, and they were mostly like the, some of these indies when there was a more robust, I think, market for them. Yeah.
yeah.
Erica, with John Wick, did you know at the script level that was going to be something major?
No.
Did you understand on opening weekend 2, 3? I think I saw you a week afterward, and I was still kind of stunned by how much I enjoyed it and the reaction.
Yeah, I mean, that's like the beauty of John Wick, right? It like sort of found its way. The script was called Scorn. It was like a very different movie. I knew that it had like look, I'm a dog lover, and I remember reading it, and I emailed Basil like, "There's something about this script. I think it's the dog. The villains are awful. There's so much. It's like there's so much hokiness. It's called Scorn, but I think there's something there." And he was like, "I agree." But no, the making of that movie was a complete dumpster fire, right? Like Chad and Dave hated each other. We lost the financing many times over. The checks didn't clear. Like we shut down. Basil was paying for wardrobe on his credit card, and then we made the movie and we screened it for domestics and everyone walked out. Lionsgate bought the movie for 0 MG. They had the international on it, and so they bought the domestic for nothing. And on July 17th, they were like, they bought it that day. They're like, we have notes. We're like, well, the movie's done and we have no money. So this is what it is. And they're like, we have no Saw this year. Let's put it out in October. It was so arbitrary. We screened it at Fantastic Fest, and Harry Knowles tweeted, "This is what action movies should be." And then I was like, okay, I think people are going to be into this. But still, it made like $30 million at the box office, which was not, I mean, it was good, but it wasn't like, we weren't like popping bottles of champagne. It had an enormous life, on VOD in the afterlife. And that's when they called and were like, we think we should make a second one. But at the time the movie came out, Keanu had like 47 Ronin coming out. He'd been in China for 2 years prior, directing Man of Tai Chi, like peaks and valleys of everyone's careers. There was no foresight. I thought it would work in like, Germany, Japan, like all those sort of foreign territories where action was traditionally working at the time. It was just very different. Action, and still to a degree now, it's like I think people sort of like snub their nose at it a little bit. And at that time, it was like a lot of very cutty kind of either like the Bourne movies or like Jason Statham movies. There wasn't a lot of in between. So we were just different, but no one saw it coming.
And I wanted to ask a follow-up about that. With it now entering the realm of a shared cinematic universe and continue to develop that while also trying to avoid anything like audience burnout, like what's the approach to make sure that each of those new projects feels new while also still giving people what they want from the universe. Is that something you guys spend a lot of time thinking about?
Yeah, I think you have to,
Mm.
right? I mean, because also it's not like Marvel, there's no IP, there's nothing underlying, there's no canon. So we're making it up as we go along. But Ballerina will have come out, I guess we shot John Wick 4, 3 years ago. It'll come out 2 years later. So there is a bit of time in between. We talk about that all the time because we're like, developing spin-offs and it's like, how much of the reoccurring characters, how much new mythology do we build out? You know, we're lucky enough to have Keanu in Ballerina, but that won't be all of the spin-offs. And, we made a series for Peacock called The Continental where we like sort of went completely off of it and started in the 70s because we didn't want to step on anything, sort of figured out what the feature path was. And I thought it was fun. We did it in like a 3-part miniseries, which I think ultimately it was 3 90-minute episodes, I think. Yeah, I think it's challenging. It's like, what's the new way in? But the good thing is like we've built an interesting world that gives like little snippets. So I think people are really interested in the backstories and kind of learning more about the characters they love. But it's got to be worth it. We have a lot of, Chad is super involved. Keanu's very involved. So it has to be good to sort of like, make the cut.
And Bly, I'm a fervent believer that all art changes lives in some way or another, sometimes very abstract, but Spotlight in particular literally changed lives and even saved lives. How hard was that to get made?
Well, it was 7 years from the day that we got the rights of the journalists involved to the day that it premiered on screen. So yeah, these movies, as we well will all know, I mean, they have a lot of them a long road to getting where they need to go, and timing is everything. We had initially, this was set up at DreamWorks. I mean, we had pitched it. I won't bore you with the details, but there was a few writers who had kicked the tires before Josh and Tom ultimately came on to do it together. And we had other talent that was involved at various different points, but we had set it up with DreamWorks. And then DreamWorks ultimately decided not to make it. And had been involved at that step. And then we partnered with Open Road and, went and made it. But there were so many twists and turns along the way that, yeah, it was one of those, who knew if it was going to ultimately get done. And there was a lot of people who would say who said journalism, nobody wants journalism movies. Hollywood's not interested. You gotta have a love story. There is no love story in here. Nobody wants to see a movie about kids being abused. The litany of excuses, they're all there, but everybody gets that on any movie, right? And you just have to persevere and put the right package together and find the right team and have the right time.
Do you think it could get made today?
Ooh, good question. I do. I think it still could get made independently. For sure. I don't think that this is like a streaming play, a studio play, but yeah, I mean there are you look at the movies that are nominated this year for the Oscar or the make the short list, and yeah, it could fall within that realm. I would say though the cost might be different. I mean, we made it for just under 20, and I think you'd be hard pressed to be able to make a movie for that price, like that kind of movie currently. I think you'd have to find a way to bring it down, but I think you could ultimately do it.
Did it take a toll on you and Nicole? I feel like I discussed it with Nicole at some point, but making something that intense, what was there an emotional toll?
I think it was generally a really all around positive experience. The one thing I would say is that it opened our eyes to things that I just didn't know existed. I didn't know the details behind the Catholic Church story first and foremost, and the abuse. And I think once it's sort of like Pandora's box, once you've let it out, it feels like it could be everywhere, and it definitely changed a lot of perceptions, or perspectives. But the people involved were, I mean, lifelong friends from both, the characters themselves to the filmmaking team. And I just think that the continuing impact that it had has been overwhelmingly positive, and the reaction that we got even from the Catholic Church itself. So yeah, I think we dodged a bullet in many ways too, in terms of just making a product that was so factually I think in correct and in line with what really happened. It was very hard for us to be ultimately attacked at the end of the day, which was good.
I'm curious, both of these films, John Wick, Spotlight, I suspect have enabled you to make a lot of films. In many ways, their success set larger things in motion for both of you. Is that fairly accurate?
It has definitely been good in terms of our productivity, since then. However, I would say scripted, you would have thought that it would be a layup from then on out for, I think we thought that too. But most of the projects that we have done since then have been in the unscripted space. We've done a lot of feature documentaries and documentary series, podcasts, but we have not yet done another scripted. And that's not for lack of having set up a number of projects in both the limited series space, the feature space, and all of that. But we can get into those, the reasons or whatever behind that. But it's been hard to get those across the finish line, especially in terms like the milieu in which we play. And it gets harder and harder with each passing year, I would say.
Eric?
Yeah, I think I probably had the opposite. I mean, we were studio producers for forever prior to John Wick. Basil we did a first look deal at Warner's, and then we went independent, and John Wick was the first movie and Sicario was the second movie. So should have been like 1 year and a half, those two movies came out, and I think branded us as an independent company. John Wick made its investors its money back, which is really sort of, I feel like, how you get anything going in this town. And Sicario was just a movie that was kind of like fancy pants, right? Like, it was people's favorite movie of the year. It was Oscars and Telluride Film Festival, Roger Deakins, all sort of those. So I think, look, success always begets success and opens different doors. Also, there's like a branding element. I think I was able to like sell Monkey Man, from the producers of John Wick, I think goes a long way and is on many of the trailers of the other subsequent features that we do, which I think is not just John Wick, but is like, it becomes like the canon of your movies, right? The body of your work. And if you can consistently prove yourself, and I think in the town as producers who like sort of the product is good, but also that you are a company that they want to work with, right? Like, you do what you say you're going to do, you deliver on time and on budget, and are like a nice human. I mean, let's be honest, the barrier for entry is very, very low these days. But yeah, we did the town, we did the Expendables, you John Wick, you like start getting a lot of that kind of stuff. And I think what's been good is like at the end, action is like one of the kind of genres that continues to travel and work, whether it's, in theater or on demand, whatever that is. So we've had a lot of opportunity. I mean, it's not hard. I mean, it's a business that is completely set up to say no to you at every day, every impasse, I find. So it's like, how do you get the yes? And I think the sort of like, you get better material, you get better shots at the ball, and you just made Sicario. I met, I'd read Wind River as a sample before I met Taylor. So then at the end of Sicario, he was like, you guys should produce Wind River. And Basil told him he should direct it. And then we sold it to Harvey, and then Harvey put us on the Current War. And then the Current War we met, and so it's like, like that, right? Like the Jewish geography or whatever. But yeah, it's definitely opened a lot of doors for us and gotten us tons of like generals with actors, right? I want to be the next John Wick. I want to learn from you guys. It's helped. It's really helped. But you got to like put in work, right? The movies have to be good consistently.
Is there negative at all? And does it set you on a path as a company that maybe made, as we were discussing earlier, making certain things more difficult because you're doing one thing now that perhaps the original intention?
No, I mean, I'd be lying if I said I had an original intention when I sort of got into this business, I think you sort of go where it takes you. And I think the art of our business in Thunder Road is the pivot, right? Like from studio, like the Warner deal was great, but they were making like superhero movies, and we were, producers who just produced. So we weren't, there was no director at the helm or some fancy writers company. It was just, we just produce. And an environment now where like everyone's producing, managers are producing, and it's like everyone can do it, actors. So has it, I think I certainly still lose out on projects to fancier people. And our joke, it is, John Wick was nominated for like a Golden Globe last year, and like National Board of Review was starting to sort of acknowledge choreography and stunts and stuntmen and action movies, which is great. It should be. But it was funny. We were in a lot of different rooms at the end of last year and the beginning of this year, and sort of Bess and I sometimes would look at each other and be like, do we feel like the I don't know, the distant cousin at the wedding, like next to, the Marty Scorsese table? I mean, maybe certain movies. I think, look, the movie business is for me, I'm a commercial. I love commercial movies. I love all movies, right? But there's a certain reach that is really exciting. Like I was wearing a ballerina sweatshirt the other day at Costco because that's my very exciting life. And the checkout guy was like, "Oh, when's that coming out?" Or like, you're like, it's cool to like see people watching your movie on the airplane. Like I like making commercial movies. I want to watch what movie Netflix puts out every Friday. I most likely don't love it, but or what I want to see it all. I'm a consumer. So yeah, that's why I say like I don't know if I'd get Conclave, but I loved it.
Mm.
You know,
Yeah.
they
Well,
probably wouldn't give me Conclave if I auditioned.
so jumping back to the decision to become producers or just come to Hollywood, Bly, when you came to Hollywood, was it to become a producer? Did you have other ambitions? I mean, in this world where now anybody can do it, as Erica was saying, and you have 84 credits on every TV series as a result. I mean, what was that the goal, and was the goal the type of stories you're telling now?
Not at all. Like, I feel, I mean, this is in the era, this was before, the ubiquitousness of like the internet and, all that. I feel like I grew up in Washington State. I went to college in the Bay Area, Santa Clara, and I wanted to go to LA and like entertainment, but I gave myself a year and then I was going to law school and I acted for a year. That was my, for as like, I didn't know anything of, I didn't know that there were other jobs, like the role of a producer, an executive, or an agent. I mean, I kind of inherently knew those things kind of existed, but I didn't know I didn't know anyone who did them, didn't, know what they meant. And so came down and did that quickly. And I did actually a bunch of grad student films for the Peter Stark, the producing program. So if you go back into whatever year that was, 2000, no, sorry, it was like 98, in those 8mm silent films for Peter Stark, you'll find me in them. But it was great. I mean, it was the years like Roslyn Thurber was in that class and Pete Corelli and, a number of others. And it was good for me to have seen what they were, establish those friendships, see what they were doing. I went off to law school at UCLA, which I loved, then became a lawyer, which I hated, absolutely hated. But I got to see what all those people from Stark were doing. And I thought, oh my God, I'm miserable at my desk, but what they're doing is far more interesting to me. And so that was when when I was an attorney, I started working with someone else who was in the entertainment space and ultimately ended up jumping off to partner with them. And that's kind of like the start. But no, I had no clue. And the first things that we sold, like when we were selling things, was like family comedies. Like we had a Disney, family comedy and Alcon Warner Brothers buddy comedy, that stuff, which is ridiculous if you think about it. Like I'm not funny, but at the time it was what came to us, and we were able to parlay them, and they ultimately didn't.
And you were writing on the side
No.
lawyer by day, or
No. I started helping someone who was acting and producing, and I was helping them legally, and then we started working on things. I wasn't writing it, but I was helping them start to produce some things on the side. And then Spotlight. And
yeah.
whole
I also
story.
have like a completely bizarro. Sorry, I didn't mean to talk over
No.
you. I mean, I grew up in Florida, and like with no sort of. I remember you on like CA.com, and it was like a red screen. I don't know if you remember that. It was a deadline. And so I went to Florida State. I mean, I like a very, very sort of like. I was like a band. Like my parents were MIA my whole childhood, so I don't know. Like I was just like doing my own thing, and I was like in college. I was like, I'm gonna go to Hollywood. I want to work in TV because I love television. Like if my children ever said something like it's so crazy. No one was paying attention. No one was paying attention to what I was doing. I was like, I'm gonna send my resume to all of these places, and I got an internship on Days of Our Lives. And when I was a junior in college, which was like the ultimate moment for me, I was like, I watched the show. It was like so exciting. So I have an aunt that lives out here. I came in here for the summer, and no one gave a shit on that show because it was like they'd all worked there 100 years. So they were like letting me do everything. I was like running fan events and was in the script department. They were like paying me. And I was like, I'm going to graduate college. I'm going to work on Days of Our Lives. And then I graduated and I like called them and they're like, yeah, no, like what? No. And so then I was a Friedman temp. I don't know if you remember what those are. I was temping in the entertainment. So I would like go office to office and work for like horrible agents, get yelled at. And then I interviewed at CA a couple times and then finally got a job working for Jimmy Darmody, who's a talent agent, who interviewed like 11 boys and me and like liked that I was from Jersey because he was from Jersey. It's like so arbitrary, right? And I worked for him for like a year and a half. I also just sort of didn't know what producing was. I knew I didn't want to be an agent though at the end of that. I mean, once I sort of, like CA is the boot camp, right? You sort of get to know the ins and the outs of it. But it was also working for a talent agent who would get like, $10 million offers for Jennifer Aniston. I would read those scripts, but I didn't really understand like true development or like any sort of other part of it. And then didn't want to be an agent. Basil and Jimmy grew up together and were best friends. And one day Basil called me and was like, "Do you want to be my assistant?" I was like, "Are you gonna interview me?" And he's like, "No, fine. If you work for Jimmy, you're fine. I have this deal at Warner's. I'm leaving for my first movie. I'm going to Vancouver, so I'm like not even gonna meet you. Just like show up." And so that was like 20 years ago, which is crazy. And when I tell that story out loud, it makes no sense. But
So Basil has pretty much been your
yeah, and Jimmy is like the same personality. So it's like everything I've learned is, I guess, from osmosis. Basil's very much like, I'm gonna like throw you in the deep end and you're just gonna figure it out. I went on set a couple of movies as his assistant, and then I don't know, I just sort of like started doing it. And then he started having kids and he didn't really want to go on set anymore. And so it just became this like slow progression of like me kind of doing a lot more. And there was always other executives. I mean, Cole, there was like lots of them, but I sort of just like I don't know, like the cockroach that like survived it all. I don't know. And here we
Or
are.
I was gonna say, well, cool. Just like for people who are listening, I think there's something really amazing, like that I did not have, which you did, which I think is incredible, is mentorship. Like, right. And I think that's something like finding the people that you can learn from and that, who are like long term, right? Like the people that you are like, ride or die, they're top of their game, they're incredible, they're amazing, and their willingness to like to just give you the not because it's not to earn the opportunity, but to give you the opportunity to go to do it and to sink or swim and to give you the responsibility and to just let you take that and run with it. That's extraordinary, truly. And that is, I think, if you can have that and find that, it just puts you miles ahead of everyone else. Yeah.
But also like you have to take, and I always say this to like the younger generation, right? It's like you have to take so much shit and make so little money for so long. And I don't know if like that, it's always like, how are we going to pay the rent? So you have that like chip on your shoulder. Um, and so it was like, you just show up every day. Right. Like, and I think that sort of like helps with the producing where there's no job too big or too small. And as his assistant, it could be anything from like, I'm not going to go to London for these reshoots. You should go do them. It could be anything.
Mm.
And that's what producing is, right? Like you show up one day and it's like the movie is falling apart and you got to fix it. Or you like got to fucking cast the pigs that are working in the scene. It's like anything is possible. You're doing it all. And so it's just, do you have that in you? I think. And I don't think a lot of people do.
So my wife Lindsay and I have been talking about the era of the internet, how it killed ignorance. We just know things instantly. And so I arrived, I think, a year, 2 years after deadline. I wasn't reading it before I came. You two arrived before this.
Do you think there's a value that there was a value to that ignorance for you two and for your generation of producers who just had to be thrown into the deep end and learn or die? Do you think that there was a real value to that as opposed to people who arrive in Hollywood today with ideas about how things work because they've read about it on the internet and how that knowledge might even get in their own way?
I don't know. I think you have to have a certain personality to make it work, and whether you had information or not. I mean, it just maybe was a little bit harder or took longer to learn it all then maybe, or to have a better understanding of like where you might want to fit in the ecosystem and what the ecosystem was. Like it wasn't all just like readily available at your fingertips in that way in terms of information. But I don't know about what you think, Erica, but I think if you really truly still want to make it as a producer, you still have to have that scrappiness within you. Even if you have all the information at your disposal, you still have to find your way. You still have to find ways to put projects together, to navigate, and to just not get beaten down every single day and just like not care and not take it and just pop up. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the access is obviously much greater, right?
Yeah.
Like I walked into an interview blind. I'll never forget Jimmy Darmody was like, "What's the last movie you saw?" And it was like rapid fire. I was like, "Bruce Almighty." And he was like, "Did you like it?" And I was like, "No." He's like, "I represent Jennifer Aniston. I put her in that movie." I mean, if I was a millennial, I would have Googled who he represented and not stuck my foot in my mouth. And maybe things like that all along the way, right? You'd have access to scripts. You'd have access to information that you could probably use to your advantage. Or maybe if you're like an independent producer, finding some unproduced script in some cockamamie way now, or like before it was like, I mean, I remember, like, opening fan mail and, like, like, there's just, like, the world is so different now. And so, yeah, I don't know. I agree, it has to be within you, but you probably make less they probably make less mistakes now than we did. I don't know.
Definitely.
And Erica, I don't even know if you could take a guess at how many projects you've developed at this point, but a lot over 20 years. Do you have a sense at this point of what makes a great screenplay as opposed to 20 years ago? What have you learned about scripts that you didn't
Yeah, I
understand?
remember it's so funny when I first started working for Basil, he would like we would do the weekend read, right? And we'd all have like our stacks of and I would be like, this isn't good enough. And he's like, but is there a kernel of an idea in there that is good and is worth, workshopping and developing? And he really taught me what development is and how to make script so much better. And he's still like amazing at that and still better at me than me. And I think and that's something that I think you're always developing. I think I have a better sense of like, reading something now, reading the tea leaves on something, or, you know, can we ever get there with I think you just like sort of can call things faster, right? Like, is this writer ever gonna get it there? Am I ever gonna get the level of cast that I need with this director? I think I'm more pragmatic. I have been around enough to like now more than ever, there's so much, like, therapy and nuance and, like, cajoling. There's so much other things that go into producing than just finding a good script. I do think that at the end of the day, like, I always say to writers, like, the unencumbered amazing script is, like, the golden ticket in this town, right? Like, so if you have that, then you can do anything, but it certainly doesn't, it's not how a bill becomes a law anymore, unfortunately.
Unless you were like if you were sitting on a pot of money and you can fully, finance the production of the movie, you are not going to get a naked, amazing script landing in your lap. Not going to happen. You're going to have to go out and find the idea, develop it, create it, all of that. Otherwise, no, not going to.
Yeah, or overpay for it, yeah.
And Bly, you referenced earlier, that you haven't got a narrative feature up, and you've transitioned now to, I wouldn't say transition, but you've evolved into producing documentaries. Can you contrast that process of of identifying stories, developing them with features? Are
Yeah.
they that different at an experiential level, but even an emotional level? I always like hearing the joy or sort of the specific kinds of satisfaction things provide.
Yeah. Well, and we're still developing a lot of narrative features as well. I think we had a somewhat robust narrative limited series pipeline in development over the last few years. And a number of the streamers, and one by one, they've gotten killed as that sector has just, been sort of eviscerated. My partner Corey is directing. I'm producing. We deal in a lot of true stories. I mean, that was what people, even when we were doing the comedies, when we saw that those were a lot of them were ripped from the headlines, we would just consume every newspaper that you can imagine, take a kernel of an idea and then flip it into a spec or a pitch or whatever it was, and sold a lot of those. And so we found Spotlight because, again, like kind of like that true story realm, and we continue to do that after the movie was released. And so a lot of stuff that came to us kept pouring in were true stories. And not every, I think, as you said, Eric, and you start to realize you're like, yeah, this will never get made. So it's like that efficiency of like, well, we'll never get made as a scripted feature. It doesn't have those elements, but it's an amazing story. So is there another medium in which it should live? And that's when like it was the perfect timing of the rise of docs in the streaming space. And, there was an appetite for them. And so we were able to parlay a number of these things that we decided weren't necessarily right for scripted into the docs. And that's how we got into that space. And then also too, since then in the podcast space, because some of these things just don't quite rise to the level of, whether it's, a doc or a scripted play, but it's a perfect podcast play. So for us, it's just evolved in that way of like a good story is a good story. Just what medium are you telling it through? And I think that's how we continue to look at all these that do come across our desk.
Both of you have now brought up a moment you realize a project isn't going to happen. And Bly, you get to sometimes, as you say, maybe shift it into a documentary story. But I've never asked producers this. I know what it's like when you begin to suspect your producer has checked out because the project isn't going to go anywhere, whatever that is. How do you experience that? How does it feel for you? Because I think most of the time the writer is just isn't necessarily told the emotional experience from the producer's part, and I think that can create it ends up feeling a bit cold for the writer because they're experiencing something very traumatic. They've sometimes spent a year, 2 years working on an idea. What is that like for you? And yeah, I don't even know what that question is, but I'm curious. How does that
Yeah,
feel?
for me, it's like I never say never. I think there's definitely like on the slate movies that are at the moment frozen, right? For whatever reason. I just never got any traction with any cast, or I never got the bite from the interesting director, or whatever the reason is, or topically it just like doesn't make sense anymore. But depending on how it's acquired, right? Like if it's an option that we eventually let lapse. But a lot of things we own, we control. We're sort of big on controlling our own IP. I'll just sort of say to look, I am weirdly tenacious. Like, again, movie 7 years in the making. This one we just sold at AFM. I'm not saying that it will even happen this time. Like, line producer just quit, just lost an actor. Like, so I'm sort of like always thinking about it, but it's less on the list. And especially if you're like in Budapest for 4 months shooting, you like think about it at 3 in the morning. Like, maybe you see an actor in something or someone's star rises, like, not a good example, but you had Glenn Powell attached to something 5 years ago, and now Glenn Powell is like Glenn Powell, right? So it's like, that's why I think you never say never.
Mm.
And oftentimes, or if I don't control anymore, let it go with God or whatever happens, 3 years later, it's like, whatever happened to that? Sometimes they come back around. I would say you just never know.
No, I mean, everything she just said. And I think it's one of those as a producer too, it's hard, especially you don't want to ever the things that you care about, you don't want to let go of, right? You don't want to call up that writer and be like, I'm giving it back to you, I'm letting it go, even if you have like time left on it, or even if you did, it's just like because you do know that there always is that potential, but because you have such a robust slate of things as a producer that you have to be managing at any given time, if that thing isn't getting that traction, then it is a matter of just like running your business and just being pragmatic. You can't give it as much attention. However, like again, like there is that emotional attachment. So I think that's probably why a lot of producers too don't, they don't want if they don't if one of the things, if you don't have anything new to share, it's very hard to keep calling a writer. It's like, I don't have any news for you. I don't have any news for you. I don't have any. So it's like, that's one of the things that's a lot of times it's not intentional to freeze anyone out, but it's just like that I don't want to let this go because I do still care about it. I think there's something there, but I don't have anything right now that's, immediately actionable.
And
I
you're
don't
letting
think-
that person down to a degree,
Yeah,
right? Like,
100%.
I feel like I've failed. Like, this is my core business, right? Like, there's nothing else. We don't really do TV. We don't really do like, we talk about all those things, but like, I'm not going to pretend to understand the TV business. It's ever changing and it's a whole sort of other beast. And so I tend to stay in my lane. Also, like, success in the lane. So just whatever. And look, I have very small kids. I travel a lot. I run a business. I run this company with 2 offices in New York and LA. Like, it's a lot, right? So yeah, I have a small staff that I'm always like, guys, like, sometimes I wish that they would sort of like run with those things too. I think those are good opportunities for kind of like, the deep bench, we like to call them. Like, I would love nothing more that if like I walked into a staff meeting and someone was like, that one script that I got exit, like, those are my dreams, my hopes and my dreams. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, like, I've been negotiating a deal with the studio for 14 months. Like, I could have made the movie 3 times over. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, some of this stuff is so mind numbing that you're like, I don't know and especially even in like the last 2 weeks with the fires, and I'm part of it. So it's like, what's the rhythm of like pushing, but not pushing? But it's like the momentum can lose in any moment, and this town is cyclical. It's like Berlin Film Festival is in 3 weeks. If I don't have a movie at Berlin, then it's not shooting in the spring. And if we don't have a movie in the spring, then it's not shooting, so you're like, you have to be thinking so far in advance, and you need all those projects. There's just so many irons in the fire at all times. So that's why, like, we keep a deep bench. You just don't know. As a random thing, I had a meeting with directors who were like super popcorn directors, and they were like, I've always dreamed about making a movie about Leni Riefenstahl. And I was like, I actually have that. You know what I mean? Like, you never know what is gonna happen.
It is from the writer's perspective, if you survive for 20 years, you have so many projects that didn't go anywhere, that you find yourself in a meeting in Italy and somebody brings up something? Well, let me tell you about that project, as if it's just on the front of your mind, even though you developed it 14 years ago.
I mean, that's my favorite question to ask writers, especially like during the strike or certain. I was like, "What's in the vault?" I
Mhm.
mean, what's unencumbered that's been hanging around that had 7 shots but didn't make it? Those are often the best scripts.
And it is just like the idea is there, and it just needs to be like updated for, you wrote it 10 years ago, it just needs a little like dusting off and updating, like
Or
maybe
gender
it's more
flipped or
relevant now.
what or this or
Yeah.
that, you know?
Yeah. Great. Ideas are great.
Well, thank you so much for this. We're going to continue talking in a moment, but I've really enjoyed the conversation so far.
As for you listening at home, maybe as you drive, maybe you're on a walk in nature, which is where I often listen to some of my favorite podcasts. Thank you so much for being with me today, but don't go just yet. As promised, there's a bonus episode to come, and if you're thinking about a future in the film TV business, it's one you need to listen to. Erica and Blye return to 5 a.m. Story Talk to discuss the future of the industry. You're going to need to become a paid subscriber wherever you're listening to this, though. Alternatively, you can head to the show notes and subscribe to my 5 a.m. Story Talk Arts newsletter, where you'll get access to all my podcast episodes days, weeks, and sometimes even months early. You'll also get access to hundreds of arts articles, most of them focused on screenwriting and writing, many of them exclusive to my paid subscribers, as well as the opportunity to join me for monthly Ask Me Anything About the Arts chats to hopefully help you with whatever you're struggling with as a creator at the moment. Upcoming guests of this podcast include Good Luck to You, Leo Grand, director Sophie Hyde, Ready or Not, and Scream directors Radio Silence, also the directors behind my wife Lindsay Devlin's first feature film, Devil's Due, and I've just learned Scott Derrickson, the writer-director of films such as Doctor Strange, The Black Phone, and most recently The Gorge. Next week, I'll be joined by Liz Hanna, the Golden Globe-nominated screenwriter behind The Post, Long Shot, and Lee, as well as the co-creator of the TV series The Girl from Plainville. Thanks again for listening, my friends. See you at the bonus episode for some more 5 a.m. Story Talk with producers Blye Pagon Faust and Erica Lee.